Hello, everybody. It is Friday. It is very hot. We are in England. Well, I'm in Leicester. And we're going to be starting a Instagram live in a couple of minutes. And I'm going to be joined by Eyal Burstein. I should say that correctly. Eyal Burstein. And we're going to be talking about food, art, and the environment. And the reason why we're talking about this specific topic is, why not? But it's something that's very specific and very precious to me, and it always has been. The intersection between how we view the world, how we eat from the world, and how we put that together has always seemed like a bit of an artistic dance for me. And I know majority of us who are eaters or who are chefs, we do consider the food that we make artistry, but it's not always seen in that way because it's consumed in such a quick fashion. Nobody's going into a restaurant and going, let me just look at this for 10 minutes. Let me just really take it in. That minute is a microsecond and it's gone immediately because it's about that physical reaction, that satiation, and you want to eat, you want to devour that plate, and you want to be excited by it. Now, if we were to put a line in that and to look at the food around us, to really experience what was in that plate, look at as I put it earlier, look at the real estate of the plate. What does the real estate of the plate look like? And does the real estate of that plate reflect our experience, our relationship to it, and also our relationship to the world around us? So a few weeks ago, I posted, I found some of Eyal's work online, and it's a fascinating art piece that he's made called, I should get this right. Why am I not going to get this right? Candy. And it's eye candy, which is a piece of candy joined to a USB, joined to a laptop. So one of these babies. And it just really got me thinking, is that food is consumed in a heartbeat, the same way that we consume data. So are we just, at this present moment in time, regardless of coronavirus, are we just consuming food to consume more data? And I was lucky enough to get a reply from Eyal when I put it up on Instagram. So he's going to be joining us for a call today, and I'm really, really excited to have him on board. So let me just see if I can find him. Just see if I can find him. Give me a second. Eyal, if you're around, could you request to join the call, please? Let's just view. I will go. Okay, we are just going live with Eyal in a second. Hey.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. Just finished training.
Training what? The marathon?
It's a good question. I'm not quite sure. Yeah, training for life, which is about to happen.
Well, please tell us more. What do you mean? It's very ominous.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's always happening, but it always seems like something in the future.
Have you just finished a workout? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just that it's in a group, and but it feels more like training for something rather than working out. Working out always sounded to me a bit passive, without an aim.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I think working out is always quite therapeutic, but then when you're at home, because you make it as a constrained part of your day, it is a bit more regimented, as if you're getting ready for the world around you at some point.
I mean, it's a bit more like in that yogic tradition where it's kind of finding a manual for your body rather than, um, I guess it's the same issue with food, where food easily gets hijacked by fads, and so does exercise, from Zumba to HIIT to TRX, and you see people ending up with hashtag recovery, hashtag day by day, one day at a time. People are always somehow injuring themselves, and I find that usually they find an image on their feed where they're in hospital or something, and that's because they're not trying to understand their body. They're trying to maybe look good, or it's a kind of which I find the same thing happens in food.
So tell us about yourself. Where are you right now, Eyal? Where are you right now?
I'm in my bedroom. I'm in Berlin, on my sofa, trying to calm down after being put in very weird positions and asked to breathe. It's a hot day in Berlin.
How is it been in Berlin? What's the situation like right now? What's the feeling like?
Berlin is too cool for COVID, so it's gone.
Really?
Yeah, people, only when you really have to be super close to people, like in a supermarket, then people are like, oh, maybe we should put a mask on. But I think in England it's a bit more stressful because the Prime Minister had it. So I think he's worried, like he's felt it. That virus touched him, and he's like, also he doesn't look very healthy. So I guess it was touch and go. Like he was there for 2 weeks, no? Sorry?
And he's just had a baby as well.
Yeah, he just had a baby.
But it's interesting you mentioned that. I think this idea of when you've, kind of goes back to the introduction, which is when you've touched something, when you've experienced it, your vibration changes to how you approach it or how you talk about it, because this idea of initially something being outside of you is now inside of you. So the whole lived experience changes. And that's, it's the reason, you and I first met, is that I've been sort of admiring your work for a while, and I
thank you.
Mustered up the confidence to put a post on social. But I think you kind of, within your work, you managed to express that, is that, what is our something that's outside of us that can also be inside of us. Like a lot of your work is in some ways centered around food, our experience with food. Can you tell me a bit more about that, and what went through your head when you created eye candy?
It's funny because you noticed that I at the time I was super unhealthy and I wasn't connected to my body or my thoughts in any way. I was kind of a childish issue that I have with justice and hypocrisy. It's something that's always been, I think most kids go through this period where you hear it's not fair. I think I never left that, but it matured into like hypocrisy and how people live with dual opposing thoughts and can still, we talked about it a bit earlier, where someone, like linguistically you have a difference between beef and cow, and you might be for human rights, but you might be saying that while eating a steak, regardless of the back end of that industry. But for me, with that specific, that was my first project when I graduated from the Royal College. It was about perception. So it started off with this really small, short video on the BBC where it was saying people can see with their tongues, and I was like, oh, that's magical. And it took another 3 years to understand what seeing is and how we perceive things, and started meeting lots of interesting people from UCL and the Wellcome Trust, and but I think it was really nice that you brought it back to food, I didn't think about it. I didn't think about its connection. And in the past 5 years, I kind of stopped designing because I thought that's the kindest thing I can do to society, not to add anything, to add more stuff to the landfills. And I also realized that there's a super unhealthy contract as a designer, as an artist, where you deal with super harsh materials in your studio, and you're breathing them in, and then you're slowly killing yourself in order to create some really small curiosity, which then gets forgotten the next season. And I saw my peers, or the kind of, the best case scenario, how a designer or artist ages, and it's not a good look. I was like, okay, I need to really understand where this trajectory is going.
Yeah.
You don't look at old artists and go, wow, you guys look great. It's always that kind of, I mean, bless Hockney, I really like his work, but is that the inevitable contract with, why do intellectuals always look unhealthy? I never understood that.
Well, I think the words that go through my head are almost, you look like as if you've lived. That's, you look as if you've
But how
lived.
did you live?
Exactly. And I think living doesn't always have to be, you could live a glorious life and have done a lot in that life. It doesn't necessarily need to be visible on your skin or in your body. It doesn't always have to be that way. In a negative way, from that point of view.
I mean, there is something called dictator adrenaline, where they never die. I heard a story about when...
We have a few of those at the moment, I think.
Totally. There was a story about when Mugabe took power, he was 53, and they said, oh, he's not going to live long. And 40 years later, they were like, oh, it's time for him to go. And, Trump is known for his culinary trickery. So I stopped that. I stopped. By the way, when you go to art openings and design openings, it's the same cheese and bubbly wine. It's not.
I know. I was on the art scene in Bombay for about 7 years. Art Thursdays, that's all I did was drank red wine and ate cheese before I was a vegan.
Yeah, it turns you into, and I know it's kind of simple, like not smelly finger food. It's just really practical. But I was trying to think to move food from the outside to within, to start not seeing the separation between different things, and trying to understand what is good for me, when I should eat, what my intention should be when I eat it. And so I slowly realized that without the proper nutrition, you won't have any good thoughts. You can't have good thoughts if you wake up with pain, you wake up with digestion issues. So in a way, it's kind of a responsibility of the artist to really understand their body, to really understand where their ideas are coming from, because artists have the responsibility of providing another layer to reality, to fight the scientific mentality or the political mentality, to, where everyone's fighting for our consciousness, for our awareness. And without having a good, strong moral compass that's based in what you eat. And I started seeing eating as a political act. And you could also be so what would be a modern day, terrorist, or a modern day anarchist? So an anarchist is someone that doesn't buy in the supermarket. You can't control that person. And then, when COVID started, it was like, I'm completely I mean, there were talks in different countries that they would have army rations. In the beginning, nobody knew how it would develop. I saw some rations in the UK which had like a couple of crunchies, some McVitie's. It looked like my dream summer camp.
But then this is a very interesting topic you bring up, because if we just, so 2 points here is that your health journey that you are at right now is, this is 10 years ago from when you first designed that piece that I put on social media, correct? So it's so interesting because the reason I talk about that is 60 or 70% of our brain resides in our gut. But that is, we're talking about our hormonal secretion is coming from our relationship to our gut, our relationship to our breath, our cortisol levels, our central nervous system. And a lot of it lives in what we eat, yet we perpetuate this cycle we perpetuate this negative cycle, because also studies show that access to technology, access to digital social media, what they do is they have negative effects on the same secretion glands. So you're saying, well, actually, I'm eating the wrong foods that are suppressing that. Then I'm watching the wrong, I'm using the technology, which is also suppressing that. So I'm generally like hitting myself from both sides, and I'm feeling shit all the time. And that's 10 years ago you created that. So I'm just like blown away that's just, but 10 years ago you were saying you were unhealthy, and now,
Well,
right?
there's definitely inertia of being a human, and I guess you're born open, and open both physically, and if you see toddlers move and sit down and squat, for them it's effortless. For us, it takes the rest of our lives to get to that place. And also because their lack of understanding, they're intensely imaginative. And I was always a thought outlier, and which isn't a fun experience as an individual, but I allowed myself to think, oh, what would what would the technology that allows you to see with that tongue, what would that look like? And just kind of go forward with ideas that are impractical or will never happen. And I always thought of myself as making like theatrical pieces, or kind of scenography to a different type of reality. And I think that's what conceptual design should do, or interesting art should do. But I was unhealthy, and I bought into the fame and all the trappings of that world. My biggest thing was to get like a VIP car that would pick me up, but I had nowhere to go because I wasn't that important. So I remember at the end of each fair, I would just go to the local pharmacy and get Twizzlers, because I didn't have, like, usually it's in Miami, like I was in the Art Basel jet set, so it was pretty like, facile and banal. There was nothing. It was just going between dinners and talking nonsense.
But just going back to your point though, because your point was when COVID started 3 months ago, we were at a point where you were seeing, obviously there was like, nobody had pasta, but it's the two things that we ran out of was a processed food, pasta, because it is processed, and then the other one was flour, because everyone's like, I'm going to make my own bread because I'm going to go back to an ancient way, because I need to do something and build something, and I'm going to learn how to make bread, which is brilliant. So we ran out of flour, but we ran out its processed brother as well, which is pasta. And it's really interesting because when we think about this idea of comfort and nostalgia in a moment of crisis, these two words are the most important things. They're when the words of lockdown are imposed on us, you start to think of cages. So to make that lockdown environment, to make that cell structure safe and soften it up, you do things inside that structure which are satiating. So that is having the nostalgic foods, and that is bringing the comfort into your diet. And it's quite interesting because in our modern day culture of what we eat, these nostalgic and comfort foods are all processed foods. So a lot of the things that we've been seeing, even if it's a interesting thing, like KFC basically have released some very interesting marketing on television, and it's Celine Dion's song "All by Myself," which is brilliant, bright red, and it's just KFC, we're back on Deliveroo, and then there's a montage of different families attempting to make KFC at home, and they were like,
I've
"You
heard
don't need to
about
do
that.
it
Yeah.
anymore. We've got you." And the thing is, it's this idea of, in a moment of crisis, what gives me comfort, and our whole idea of comfort is completely skewed, because in a moment of crisis, your body needs so much more too, but we go to things because we've been predisposed to believing that they're the right things that support us.
No, that's a very good. Sorry, go on.
No, just because we're predisposed to believing that they support us because of what we've been fed through time, what images we've been fed through time. And something that I was listening to a few podcasts earlier. This is a wonderful one by Linda Palacio called "The Taste of the Past," and she was talking about beans and the power of beans and legumes, which have been completely disregarded throughout this process, because they are such a good source of energy, of vitamins, but then they've been disregarded because people don't know how to cook them, because we only know how to cook with like processed wheat or potatoes, really. So
Well, it's interesting to hear the British side of it, because you cannot close bakeries in Germany. That would have been unthinkable. So bakeries were constantly open. They were essential businesses. So
really,
nobody bought flour here.
really, you didn't have that problem.
It's
But
I know I,
the culture in Germany is that you've always had good bread. Whereas we don't have that in England.
Germans think that it's good bread, but I think that's again back to kind of like what you grew up with, which is to your second point, which this is kind of where I've graduated to. My main aim in life at the moment is to disconnect emotions from eating, so I can eat what is good for me, what is helpful for my longevity, or allows my body to do what I want it to do. And that's been a real struggle. So, and that's what I was saying earlier about kind of being an anarchist, is being someone who grows their own food, controls their own intake.
Yeah.
Flour. By the way, there was a huge uptake in the UK of canned food, canned beans. So beans, they had a massive resurgence, but perhaps not in the way that you meant it.
But there's a bigger bean culture in the US because of the Mexican population and the South American population. We don't have that bean culture in the UK because the beans that we're used to eating, there's certain European styles of beans, Italian styles more specifically, but majority of the bean consumption here is done by Indian and African populations that live in the UK. And
they were saying that it was mainly Heinz baked beans that were being.
Baked beans you're talking about. Oh yeah,
well, I mean, that's the.
I thought you were talking about like beans as in like kidney beans and all the ancient beans.
Tomato sauce, and I was listening to the Chamber of Commerce of canned food in the UK, and they were really happy at the uptake of like bacon sandwiches in cans, and really interesting. But I found it super interesting. If you want to disconnect between between food and the feeling of home, and be at home whenever, wherever, regardless of food, you have to see things for what they are.
Yes.
Whether it's advertising or whether it's your mother pushing on some sort of simple food that was easy to make to keep you quiet, but you now associated with love and with home and with childhood and with comfort. You know Oatly, right?
Yes, I do.
So the reason they became successful is because they were the only brand at the time that didn't add anything. It was just oats and water.
Yes.
But the problem is that when you order your flat white to go with a plastic top, it it separates. So the oats separate because it's not fat enough.
Yes.
And so it looks like the milk has gone off, but you just ordered it, so you know it doesn't have any milk in it. But there's a dissonance there, and so many people must have complained that they added this barista version, which meant two things. One is Oatly sold their soul and added oil, rapeseed oil, and oil is not good for you in any way. It's tasty, it's satiating,
Yeah.
it's not good for you. And so you have this barista version. So a person ordering a flat white with oat milk, now it looks exactly like a flat white with regular milk, which is a super weird thought dissonance that's happening where you want to eat something healthy, so you have oat milk, but you want it to look like cow milk, so you add oil, making it unhealthy or not as healthy as the original oat. And I find that the same with fake meat. So it's something that you really need to keep an eye out for. Like, if you want to be independent, you constantly have to read the back of stuff. They just
I think the point that I think this is a really interesting point actually, because you know the farm to fork strategy for the EU was just released 2 weeks ago, and as a part of the farm to fork strategy, the EU has said they're going to support and give a large volume of money to the research of novel proteins, and which is a great win for novel proteins. But then because what the plus side of it is that when you have novel proteins, it's plant-based, it's made in the lab, brilliant, that's great. And what it does, it starts to slowly transition people over from a traditional agricultural system that, you know, relies on animals for their protein, and it takes them off to a different way. That's, I think I agree with that, but again, based on our conversation that we think we had on Monday or Tuesday, is why does it have to be there? Why is that change in consumer psychology based on this replacement culture? Because we create a replacement culture because, again, it's our animal instinct. It's you know, it's about dissonance. It's about, again, it's about activating the same saliva glands to have the same reaction to something else, because it's a capitalistic thought. Somebody's got to make money at the end of it. So we have to make money. We don't want to lose out on money, and we don't want consumers to actually feel change. So then that's the market we have to go into. But again, back to your point, which is it then pushes us to people don't read labels. You know,
there's no change.
There's no change.
And the real change that is required is a behavioral shift.
Yes.
So there's a, and it goes to there's a guy called Aubrey de Grey. I don't know if you know this guy. He's does a lot of TED Talks about longevity, and it's basically talks about the conversation that we have to have as a society. If we're going to live longer, which we are, and there's more of us, we need to have an honest conversation about, you know, how many kids do we have? Do we all have 6, 7 kids? Okay, fine. But then we have to have massive behavioral shifts. We can't all have a to-go cup, even if it is biodegradable, which it's nonsense. You can't constantly extract stuff, squeeze the earth, and then, you know, find solutions for our shitty behavior. We have to understand why we're doing things. And behavioral shifts don't happen when we pander to our lowest common kind of, I mean, we're all lazy and selfish and blind in some place, but why promote that? Why create products?
The thing is, humans are inherently lazy. We are an inherently lazy race because we have a larger brain capacity, and that's been discovered over time, and that we've been able to create currency, we've been able to create fire, we've been able to put ourselves in this weird way at the top of the food chain, which shouldn't really happen, but it has happened because of the size of our brain. So, but that's not made us any more active, that's made us lazier. And you and I had this conversation again, was if I were to eat meat, I would need to be able to go out and hunt and kill and do the processing work, and then I would eat meat. I've tried fishing and I failed, and I cried because the poor fish had the hook in its mouth, and I was like, this isn't nice. Like, I wouldn't want anyone to do that to me. But that we're so disconnected because of the system. And I wonder within this moment whether, and this is, I think, a lot of people who think about food, who think about art, who think about environment, and their work is focused on that connection. I wonder what the next chapter will look like, because people have been eating at home for 3 months. People have been eating less meat because they've been cooking at home, or a lot of people I know that have been eating better meat at home because they're saving they're spending more because they're not going out.
What kind of meat?
Not going out.
No, what did you say? I heard investor meat. I don't know.
Oh no, they've been investing more in meat, so they've been buying better quality meat.
Oh, okay.
Because their spend on hospitality and nightlife has reduced. People are saying, well, I'm gonna buy that choice cut for myself, which I think is a better thing to do. I am gonna drive, because I can, that mile to the local butcher and support my independent, because I know they're going to give me better stuff. But I just wonder what the next chapter will look like, especially, and I'd be eager to find out from yourself, because you've been vegan for how many years now?
It's been 5 years, but I do eat meat in order to not call myself vegan. So I have meat once a year, so I don't have to.
Not call yourself vegan. Can you tell me more about that?
I find that this back to that initial conversation where, I mean, capitalism is so beautiful and so great that it just take anything you throw at it and then sell it back to you at a slightly higher price point. So I cannot be involved in any of these labels that, I mean, Impossible Burger is slightly more expensive, or, it's something that was grown in a lab is slightly more expensive than an actual sentient being.
Yes.
I mind boggles. But so for me, and also I find a lot of people that have eating disorders hide behind whatever you want, paleo. I can't even count the amount of different types of intermittent fasting. That's the latest kind of for anorexics. Brilliant.
That's quite a bold statement. I do intermittent fasting 6 days a week.
Well, I hope you recover. No, I'm kidding. My point is that I thought not everyone, but a lot of people hide behind fads, and I don't know what your intention is, and we can talk about your exact intention and how. I'm obsessed now with this guy Sadhguru, and he talks about intermittent fasting, and he says it's really advanced. Wait, try to eat every 3 hours, every 6 hours. Let's start with that. He talks about not eating as part of a yogic, and again, all language is stolen, and I'd like to talk about language in a bit, but even the word yoga conjures up something that's not what it is. It's another part of the dissonance. For him, it's part of understanding who you are, what it is to be human, and how there isn't a difference between things. There isn't a difference between the tree or the lentils that you're eating. The lentils you know, you eat it and then they are you. You know, when this moment that we're having just now, in a moment, it will become part of me, become part of my experience. So it's not about standing and pretending to laugh or trying to squeeze yourself into, contort yourself into different positions. You know, it's done for a reason, and you eat certain foods and you fast at certain times of the month, and it's totally, it's like thousands and thousands of years of understanding the cosmic connection that we have, and food is part of it. Actually, that guy Sadhguru says, worry about water, don't worry about anything else. Water is your biggest problem. And I've started looking into that and trying to treat that differently, noticing how much calcium there's in water. I don't know, it's pretty hard water here in Berlin. I don't know about England, London, or how it's treated.
Leicester's pretty good actually, because we have like, it was one of the largest textile hosiery producers in Europe before. So the water in our area is very good. Yeah, calcium for sure. Everything is processed, and there are chemicals added to purify the water. But generally, like, compared to, I'm moving back to London next week, and there was a moment today as I poured a glass of water, because I'd given myself the challenge of drinking 8 pints of water a day. Because I feel very, very dehydrated at the moment.
Okay.
When I'm at home, and my body's not rejecting it. And I as I was drinking it, there was this moment where I was like, this tastes very good here. It's not going to taste this good in London. And I almost felt myself satiated and sort of attached to this glass of water. Could be because I'm in my mother and father's house too. Who knows? But it is true. Like, it's the simple things that Sadhguru talks about. It's that simplicity of our relationship to our environment, which is gone, but however, I feel has been heavily highlighted again in the last several months, because life is about simplicity, and we're at this point where we're reevaluating what our core beliefs are, what our foundations are. I mean, you know, we spoke last week, and if you don't mind me saying, you were saying that you're done with Berlin now.
Okay.
And right? Didn't you say that?
Yeah. I did
why
say
is that? Why are you feeling a bit tired of Berlin?
It's not Berlin. I mean, Berlin is annoying to me on so many levels, but it's not specifically Berlin. I mean, I had the same feeling when I lived. Pardon? Cities, yeah. There is a hardcore left liberalism mentality that's hijacked the city, and because of my past, my ears, the hairs on my ears like start going like, leftism, ooh, that's going wrong. And that's a whole other conversation. But I think the cities will end up, and I told you, will end up dystopian places where people are institutionalized mentally, physically, will be heavily reliant on food supplies, pharmaceutical supplies, and the countryside. And I'm not romanticizing farmers, or that I know in England there's this kind of, if you make it, then you buy a home in the country, and maybe you're a weekend country gentleman with your Land Rover and Waitrose bags and whatever. But and here in Europe, everybody has like a country home, or the Scandinavian tradition. But I'm talking about people who are genuinely physically and mentally self-reliant, and they're not. It's not about a business. They're not trying to make a business in the countryside. It's about a connection with the earth. It's a connection with their location, and I think it's very humbling to work the land, to understand, you know, your relationship. I think we have a question somewhere. I don't know if it's that. I can't follow it. So many
the question.
So,
Well, we've had a couple of
okay.
comments actually. So some comments would be,
Oh, okay.
I don't think we've had have we had a question? Oh, 1 second.
Oh, what happened?
Some of the, oh no, you're here. So something from Elizabeth was the way we've been taught about comfort and nourishment seems so polar opposite when it comes to food, which is exactly what we were talking about earlier. And we had some, Rupali was basically saying that, you know, it's all about business too. When we talk about novel proteins, it's about it is a capitalist culture again. And it's interesting that novel proteins now are backed by the biggest tech companies. So the tech companies, again, this feeds back into that initial image. It's the tech companies that are feeding your brain and feeding your gut at the same time, which is ridiculous.
Did you end up watching Brazil?
So Brazil, I didn't realize it was such an old movie. So this afternoon I was like, oh my God. And it's so dystopian, and it reminded me of A Clockwork Orange, and Clockwork Orange is one of my most favorite films of all time. But then it reminded me of two other things too. It reminded me of The Trial. Do you know The Trial?
Kafka?
Yeah. So
I think I only read that. I think I saw The Castle as a film.
So I had to study The Trial for 2 years, and I did theatre at school, and it just reminded me of that. It was very, very intense. That was really, really good.
But did you see that? What do you think about the food part?
I haven't got to that part yet. I just watched, I think, the first 30 minutes. I didn't get to it.
So the food part is, so one of my, I mean, it's just Terry Gilliam. Anyway, it's brilliant. Yeah. The technology aspect of it, you know, both Kafka, Brazil, many of these dystopian futures deal with bureaucracy and how bureaucracy will control us. And I mean, this was in the 70s, 80s, and it was obsessed with information for information's sake.
Yeah.
And we're there. It doesn't look exactly like that, but we are there.
That image of the mother having a facelift was the most weirdest thing that I
have seen. Some friends on here, and anyone knows my mother, it's like that. Like I've actually made a meme of my mother, and I wish I could share it here. It'd be so hysterical. But yeah, there's gonna be a split between the different types of people, and I think in all those films there's a moment where the hero, the main protagonist, has this kind of wish to escape, wish to go somewhere else.
So Terry Gilliam made this film called Brazil in 1985, if anyone's watching, and it's got Jonathan Pryce. He's one of my most favorite actors, and it's so interesting seeing such a young Jonathan Pryce. You're like, oh my God, you're such a baby. And you know, he was a bit happy clappy in that role, and then he's taken on so many serious avatars in the last 30 years. But it's interesting that something like that's made in literally less. It was just 30 years ago. Well, 35 years ago, that's when it was made. And we are pretty much there. We are pretty much there, but but now it's not even people. It was our first addiction to technology being technology, and now actually technology is, you know, technology can run on its own. There is no one that needs to be there. That human interaction doesn't even need to be there the way in which it is in the film, which is actually even more scarier because we've actually surpassed that moment.
Well, we never get to see what's running it, so you never know why there is that wish for all that info. But if you go a bit backwards to, we talked about stoicism and cynicism in the Greek tradition. It's the same issues. Diogenes, my favorite Greek philosopher hero, he was he was all about, he was cynical to the bourgeois society of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And he would go around the market with in rags with a sign saying, "I'm looking for a human." And he would go up to people and say, "Are you a human?" He goes, "No, I'm looking for humans." And that was, he was born in 325 BC. Still the
Wow.
same issues. His dad was the head of the mint of not the sweets, but the coin minting, and he defaced currency. And back then it was as bad because currency was power back then. We have not changed a bit. None of it has changed, and we're still trying to do the same thing. Diogenes had a bowl where he drank water from, and one day he saw a boy cup his hands and drink water, and he realized he doesn't need the bowl. What is it to be human? Why? What is the innate humanity in us? And it starts with nourishment. It starts with, like you said, the images you see, the food you can have a cheat day as long as you know that's a cheat day. I talk to people. People always ask me, because I lost a ton of weight. It looks like I used to wear a fat suit. That's how big I was. And so people ask me, and I tell them, and it's always the same answer. It's like, "Oh, that's super extreme." It's like, I eat lentils and vegetables and fruit. That's super extreme. And then the next thing is people say to me, "Well, I always listen to what my body tells me." And I ask them, "Oh, what does your body tell you?" "It's 90% egg." My body tells me to eat egg, and I just have an egg. But nobody really understands that the gut microbiome, the different enzymes that you are feeding,
Yeah.
want more of that.
You've built an addiction receptor. That's what you've done. You've just built addiction into your body, and it's very interesting because we talked about Kundalini yoga the other day, and we talked about this idea.
Oh yeah.
We talked about like addiction is, there's physical addiction, but that physical addiction comes from different feelings inside of your body there, and it's about secretion of hormones. It's about what you've conditioned your body to be addicted to, or constant exposure that you've had. And it's really interesting when you say that, and this idea of, again, going back to nostalgia and comfort. It's like, oh well, I get that. Like, I sometimes feel similarly to what the person said to you. Is like, I try not to use the word vegan anymore because I feel like I don't want to have a label. I just eat. That's my journey. Like, I eat whatever I want to eat. Like, I don't eat dairy, but I don't need to have the label vegan. But sometimes I do feel like if I have a piece of fish, there is a moment of when I used to eat fish, my body would feel incredibly energized. And having been a vegetarian my entire life, up until I was like 19, and I tried fish for the first time, it's a very different feeling. I felt energized in a way, and I was like, oh my God, like, this feels different in my body. Like, I don't get this energy from vegetables in such a rapid way. But again, it's like, do I keep feeding into that? Because I came home and I ate 2 cucumbers today with lemon and salt, and that was, like, for me, the most exciting thing. I was like, that's so delicious. What does my body ask me? My body tells me to eat 2 cucumbers because I've had that snack since I was 5. Like, I know what you mean, because it's weird. We condition ourselves.
Lately, I've been so within the Stoic tradition. I've been I don't know if my trainer is on here, but I've been making these delicious cakes made out of oats and roasted nuts, and honey as icing, and just really super delicious. But I've been using it as a tool, as a Stoic tool, to see how long before I touch that thing, how many days I can. It just sits there in the fridge looking at me every time I open it, and I don't touch it.
Oh my God, what? It's like self-preservation in some way. There's actually this is actually a challenge on social media right now, which are probably going to hate me mentioning. It's called the temptation challenge.
Is there?
Basically, you have a bowl of food, and if a small child, it's just basically torture. Child sits there, and then you put the bowl of like their favorite snacks. So it could be chocolate, strawberries and cream, whatever. You put it in front of them, and then you say to the child, let's call the child. What should we call the child? Tom? Tom. Okay. Like,
Diogenes.
Diogenes? Okay,
No, Tom is fine.
Okay. So say, Tom, Mummy's going to be in the kitchen for 2 minutes. Mummy's going to just go into the kitchen. Do not touch that. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Don't touch it. And it's these heart-wrenching videos of the child just looking at that and salivating as if it's, there's that experiment when the dogs are salivating. It's like salivate. The child is salivating over this dish, but it's not, the children aren't eating it. And it's so interesting when it is stoic in some ways, because, it's that challenge of how much do I need this? What does it give me? What is my attachment to it? And do I serve it or does it serve me? And I think with my sort of personal philosophy is a sort of this marriage of foundational Hinduism, because that's how I grew up, but like it's Buddhism and Stoicism together. And I think, and it is that relationship. And I think we look at ourselves in that way of, do I serve it? Am I serving enough? But it's very rarely that we can look at the things that we take for granted, like sustenance, and say, how does it serve me? We become blind to that relationship, and that is how addiction forms.
We talk about taste, not about health.
Yes, exactly.
But Sadhguru was saying something really nice about difference between Hinduism and Buddhism, and he says when you go into a house in India, you get treated like a god, and you get like fed, and then in a Buddhist monastery, nobody would dare ask you because you might be fasting, which is part of a kind of enlightenment tradition. So they wouldn't want to, and I thought that's so interesting. It's also if you go into like a Jewish home or like a classic kind of eat something, it's this other thing, oh, you look unhealthy, eat something.
Yeah,
it's like,
eat. Yeah. It's the aggression. I mean, I think the three food cultures that seem to be very similar is Indian, Italian, and Jewish food cultures. They're very similar. We're all quite aggressive people. We know what we want, and we're very proud of our cuisine, and we force it onto others. There's not many other cultures that I've come across that, a lot of other cultures are steeped in tradition, but they're also like steeped in like ritual, which has respect and silence. Whereas ours are like loud and like eat. Like, why are you not eating? You're losing so much weight. Like,
and you get takeaway as well. They give you stuff to go home with, and that's why whenever I'm in Japan, I'm always so hungry. They never say eat. I'm always so hungry there.
So I know that this will cut off in about a few minutes, because it only kind of goes for an hour. But,
okay.
There was a comment that we had from Elizabeth again to say, to what you said about being able to be self-reliant and living outside of the institutionalized cities, doesn't that come with the privilege of having the ability to make that choice? Which is a good question. Do you think it's about an ability to make that choice, or what do you think?
Oh, I get best cake ever from my trainer, you see. Well, I think that's apart from extreme circumstances, there is always a choice. It might not be easy, it might not be simple, but we always have a choice. And there's one of my favorite modern Marxist commentators, Slavoj Žižek, says that actually our silence and continued agreement with the current system is the real violence. We're basically say we don't have a choice, and yet we have our iPhones and we ignore the fact that they are made by Foxconn, where that building, I don't know, Asif is there. It's a building that is designed with nets inside the building to catch people committing suicide. And most people that have iPhones know that. And so, you know, we complain on Twitter and give Jack Dorsey money by being, you know, so actually maybe going into the countryside. I don't mean into like a beautiful country cottage. There's lots of other ways, simple ways of, when I was thinking about doing that right now, I was thinking of actually temporary structures, which are super cheap. There's these geodesic domes, which are not so expensive. And living off the grid and not being part of society, on not being plugged into anything, meaning also that could be our last ever IG call. Yes, choices are hard. We actually don't have to take, choices are a bit like responsibility. You can ignore it, but somebody else will take it, and you might have to live under that person's regime. So I hope many people learn to properly cook during COVID and appreciate how good the EU is and how important it is to have open borders, and not take simple things for granted, like sunlight. And so I know sometimes it looks like there's no choice, but there is always a choice. It's just
no, really, really valid point. And I think that the choice is, it starts with a small step with anything too. You know, it starts with really small steps to build a framework that's new for yourself, because we're all going to battle fear. We're all going to battle this idea of what security looks like, living off the grid. So it's important for us to take those small steps. I'm being told that I've got 1 minute 52 left. So I'm going to ask you one question, which is, what does home feel like for you?
home. Yeah, it's something that I'm working on every day, and I'm aiming for it to be something inside and nothing to do with food or with the people that I'm with, but just to be at ease and at peace with myself. And God, that's so hard. That's so tough.
No, there's no real answer to it. It is what it is for you.
I ate microwave meals for so many years. Used to love hospital food, army food, lovely. Can't imagine being that person now.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Eyal. It was so
No,
good to
thank you, Anjali. It was lovely. It's really.
And you and I will definitely be in touch. Maybe I'll be coming to see you wherever you are next. But thanks so much. Thanks everybody for joining in and the questions. And I will be sharing this on IGTV.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a really good evening. Bye.
Bye-bye.